Alright, so modern humans have it pretty easy, you know? I mean, my ancestors would have spent their days hunting the food they would eat for that night, and their nights eating the food that they caught during the day. Rinse and repeat for nigh on 40 years. Make sure to set aside some time for some baby making.
I see you don't have a lifeguard here at your beach.
I'm not at the beach, this is a bathtub.
And then you die and let your offspring continue the tradition.
We do that for 40 years and then we die. Sounds like a pretty good deal to me. What do you say?
Then some genius had the idea to cultivate some of those seeds that have just been lying around, and long story short, jump forward a couple thousand years and you got humans like me who don't really need to spend their time trying to actively not die or find a cure for starvation. I'm still having trouble figuring out the whole baby making thing.
Those damn lemon-stealing whores.
But to cut to the chase, us humans often have so little to do nowadays that we go out of our way to make challenging stuff for us to do just so we can have something to stimulate our existence.
I'm bored.
Enter games. There's a bunch of different types, and while I've traditionally talked about the video variety on this channel before, another hobby of mine are games that take the form of board. It all started with one game of Settlers of Catan with my cousins, and I was hooked. Now I find myself unable to stop collecting board games, only to play Secret Hitler and Cards Against Humanity time and time again on the very rare occasions my friends' schedules actually align for an evening. So board games are the form of game that I've adopted because they're fitting for a guy of my stature. And so since humans aren't really able to just slam into one another in warfare anymore, we've kind of substituted that with another popular pastime in the form of another type of game.
Football is just war where you don't kill people, with tight measurable rules so you know who won.
Oh, wow, it is, isn't it?
You got infantry, you got light cavalry, you got heavy cavalry, you have artillery, airstrikes, you have defenses. It's just war.
So I've mentioned before that I don't really even keep up with American football. I don't even really watch football, and yet I find myself saying again that it's the biggest sport in America. Football is by far the biggest sport in America. I do, however, keep up with board games, so what if you could somehow just combine the two? I'll probably never play a real game of football in my life, but if you could somehow put the game with the most injuries into a format where I can sit down and not have to move more than a few feet at a time, then perhaps finally I can experience too the marvel that is football in a format for the rest of us. That's not Madden. So sometimes I like to shop at my local Goodwill. Like seriously, half of my wardrobe are just cheap as hell clothes that I've bought from Goodwill. Make of that what you will. All I ask is that you imagine my surprise and delight when I'm perusing the puzzles with guaranteed missing pieces and I find what I've been dreaming of for literal minutes, an NFL board game. Alright, let's tone down the theatrics a little bit. How do you turn a sport like football into a board game? Well, if there was any sport that was already kind of set up like a board game, I'd argue that football is it. I mean, football is essentially a turn-based strategy game already, so it's not that much of a stretch of the imagination to envision some kind of football board game where you use your pieces on either offense or defense to get a football token across the game board. I'm thinking something like chess, but both players set up their pieces concurrently and then somehow simultaneously resolve those pieces to see what the status of the football is after that turn. Sort of like the Game of Thrones board game, how everyone sets out tokens to affect their troops at the same time and then go about resolving those tokens you just played. I have no idea how this game goes about it though. I've never opened it outside of glancing to see if all the pieces are there, which they remarkably appear to be, which is absolutely crazy for a secondhand board game. So I might not know much about football, but I know that traditionally it's limited to only 2 teams, but this game decided it was high time to be more inclusive and invite up to 3 times as many to the party, so I have no idea what this game would look like with up to 6 people. The game also boasts that it includes all 32 NFL teams and has over 120 pieces. So opening the box, there's this little plastic brown football that I could not for the life of me figure out how to put together, only to later realize you're not supposed to. The game board itself looks like an NFL field. The brand Toy Island, based out of Hong Kong, made this game, as well as a bunch of other licensed toys and Disney princess dolls and whatnot. But they made sure to get the most out of those 32 teams because they appear on these little football tokens, these little banners you put on your respective end zones, and these little player tokens that, I gotta admit, are pretty cute. They're like a physical representation of the team's name, so you've got a Philadelphia Eagle or a Tampa Bay Buccaneer, or a Cleveland Brown. They're not all consistent. For instance, not all the animal teams are actual animals, and they don't all exactly make sense. Like I guess an LA Charger is just a dude in a swimsuit. Although this game is probably a little bit older, so I don't know, maybe it's a San Diego thing. This is one of those games that keeps score on an external piece of paper, so if you haven't gone office supply shopping in a while or just really love this game and have played it so much that you've run out of the score sheets, you might be out of luck. The rules don't seem to mention the game coming with a pencil, but the previous owner had my back by throwing one in there. Speaking of which, he or she seems to have gotten bored after only a single game because only 2 of the little football tokens were popped out and the single scorecard was between these 2 teams. The game seems like it was the game to end all games though, because it ended with an unprecedented score of 91-77. There's also a lot of little smaller pieces that are just kind of freeballing it at the bottom of the box. So let's set up the game. To start, despite allowing for up to 6 players, this doesn't mean that we'll finally get to see a game on the football hexagon like we've all been dreaming of. Players can just form teams on either side. Speaking of teams, each side picks an NFL team and puts the corresponding token in the little plastic football, which they for some reason call a megacore. You also put your team's corresponding end zone banner into your side and snap it into place with a little plastic field goal post thing. That big plastic football that I couldn't figure out how to put together, that's actually a dice wall, and those little mascot guys are called rushers with a Z. You pop out your team's mascot as well as any others you may want to cheer your team on if you needed some moral support during the game, I guess. You can also use this guy in place of the football token if you so desire. So once you get all that set up, you're ready, finally, to play some football. And I must say, this game looks pretty nice. The game board and tokens, they're all pretty charming and it looks pretty good when it's all set up. And that's pretty much the only praise this game is going to get because the actual gameplay of this game is pretty poop. So a while back, Vox made a video explaining why underdogs do better in hockey than other sports, and they showed where the major sports would fit on a spectrum of luck to skill. As you can see, actual football falls ahead of hockey and past the midway point, but behind baseball, soccer, and basketball. So if you were to put NFL Rush Zone, the board game, on this spectrum, it would probably fall back over here, maybe a little ahead of Candyland. This game is literally entirely luck-based. Virtually no skill is involved. Alright, so look, you set up the game board and you flip a coin to see who's receiving the ball and you're ready for kickoff. How do you do a kickoff? Both teams roll their green dice and you take the difference of the 2 numbers. So this number determines if it's a touchback or a defensive stop or a catch and run. Not really anything you can do to affect the successfulness of the kickoff, but you know, that's fine. A lot of games start off with a little bit of randomness to get the ball rolling. Except a football, it doesn't really roll. It kind of like waddles side to side, you know? But it doesn't matter. The ball has been kicked and we're ready to play some football. So the bulk of football is one team trying to get the ball to the other side of the field and the other team trying to get them to not do that. So what's the best way to translate this physical game of cat and mouse into a board game? You roll more dice, apparently. So both teams roll their 3 white dice against their football-shaped dice wall, and there, that's the first 3 downs. You don't actually have any kind of interactivity during this part, no throwing or running the football, no plays of any sort. You just roll your 3 dice, each one for each down, and that's all you get. Just hope your total number of 3 dice is higher than your opponent's, who's simultaneously rolling their 3 dice. If it's a tie or higher, huzzah, you got a first down, easy as that, and can advance 10 yards. If your dice rolls were higher and 2 of the numbers were the same, then lucky you, you can now move 20 yards instead of 10. If you're on offense and you roll 3 of the same number, even if that total is lower than the defense, whatever number you rolled 3 of, you can move that many spaces down the field. Apparently this is akin to the quarterback completing a long pass down the field, so I guess I was mistaken when I said you can't affect your team's actual plays during your 3 downs. You can sort of indirectly throw a long pass if you're lucky. Kind of. Alright, so then if during those 3 rolls, the defense rolls 3 of the same number, that's automatically a fumble, and whatever number was rolled 3 times, the ball goes that many spaces the opposite way, and the offense and defense have now switched. So for a majority of playtime, it's just a game of seeing whose dice rolled higher, and those 3 little special rolls, as the rules call them, are the only things adding any sort of variety to the game of who can roll higher by adding in who can roll more of the same number. There's literally 0 skill involved in any of this. Are any of those doubles?
Yeah.
How many?
5, 5, 1.
Okay, so you got I got 6. So you got a double, so you go up not 1 but twice.
Cool.
Alright, so let's say you get the ball all the way to the end zone and huzzah, you've scored a touchdown. So you can just automatically take the extra point for free, or you can try for a 2-point conversion. So believe it or not, the 2-point conversion is actually kind of complicated, so you pay attention. First, you take the green die and roll it. Now make sure you remember this number. You might want to take a picture of the die or write it down just to be safe. Alright, so now the opponent rolls their green die. So remember the number that you wrote down or took a picture of, the number on your green die, not your opponent's. Alright, if that number is the same or higher than the number your opponent rolled on their green die, then you got the 2 points. If it's not, it failed. Now I know that was a lot of numbers being thrown around, and hopefully that didn't get too convoluted. Alrighty, so let's say you roll your 3 dice on offense and the defense rolled higher, so you didn't get a first down. Well, now you have a choice. You can go for it, kick a field goal, or punt it. Going for it is easy. You both just roll your green die, add the number to your pre-existing cumulative white dice sum, and if your total is higher, congratulations, you got a first down. If it's still lower, then it's a turnover and the other team's ball. You can attempt a field goal as long as you're at least on the 50-yard line. You just have to roll the green die and roll higher than the current yard line you're on. I decided to do this when I played a game against my sister on the floor without near enough lighting and missed a field goal on the 10-yard line. To punt, the offense rolls the green die and you move the ball that many spaces. That's it. You're equally likely to kick a 10-yard punt as a 50-yard punt. And that's the game. Those are all the mechanics you'll need to learn to play NFL Rush Zone, the board game. The only bit I could consider having a hint, having a smidgen of strategy, is what you do after you get a 4th down, and only then, because those are the only choices that are actually somewhat affected by your current position in the game, so the risk-reward ratio can go up or down and makes your choices have a little bit of significance. For like 90% of the game though, you're just going to be rolling dice and hoping the numbers are high. It's like if they turned craps into a board game based off of the NFL. I think it's a little misleading to say this game has up to 6 players. I mean, any game can be up to 6 players if you just form teams and take turns playing the game. So for that matter, why stop there? Why not say the game is up to 10 or 20 or infinite players? You just need to play on one giant ass team. I mean, this game is boring enough as is, so I just can't imagine playing this game with a group of people, everybody waiting patiently for their turn to roll the dice. And speaking of misleading, the entire existence of those Rusher mascot guys is misleading. They serve no purpose. You can use them in place of the football token if you want, or you can just have a bunch off to the side sitting there. I still think they're cute, but I mean, I feel like the game designers had to have realized that they designed a game with no substance and needed something to fill up more space in the box. And for that matter, the dice walls serve no purpose either. I mean, I guess it's convenient to have something to hit your dice against so they don't just scatter all over the place, but it's not like they're really necessary. They can sort of hide your dice rolls from your opponent, but it's not like you really need to do that either.
So you can't see it?
We're hitting the wall. Yeah, I can't see your dice. Well, I'm not supposed to. I can see that.
Should I move it and do it again?
think it matters. Just another peripheral that admittedly does add some theming, I guess, but serves no purpose. Same with the field goals. They do look nice, sure, but they're completely useless. Most of the board games I play have a purpose for all of their pieces, but in this game, like half of the stuff in the box is just for aesthetics. But I guess it wouldn't look very appealing if the box just came with the board, 8 dice, the football token, and the score sheets, since that's literally all you would need to play the game. And something else that's kind of fucky is the way you keep score. I mean, I guess it's not that fucky, but it did kind of confuse me. Each team gets 3 offensive and defensive turns per quarter, and you're simultaneously keeping track of your offensive score and your opponent's defensive score, and then adding them up for each quarter, and then doing that 4 times and adding them up for the total. I don't know. I mean, I tried to do this when I played a game for realsies, but I got so bored I didn't even really bother. Speaking of which, my sister, who had to ask what a punt was,
Is that a punt? Punt means you took the ball.
was decimating me by the time we decided to end it because, as I said, this game requires no skill. I guess the people who owned and donated this game before me realized that too, after scoring that unprecedented 168 total points. And that's pretty much NFL Rush Zone the board game. Was it worth the $3 I spent on it? I mean, because it gave me material to make a video on, sure, but as like a game that has like a reason for existing to play, no. I mean, it's definitely style over substance with this one because it does look like it could be fun all laid out. And then you start reading the rules and realizing that it's literally all determined by dice rolls, and that just kind of kills the vibe of the game. But I definitely did have a fun time making this video about it, so guess I have to give it credit for that. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching if you got this far, and even if you didn't. This was definitely fun to make, and I thought it'd be interesting to maybe find other board games based off of odd properties that nobody has ever played and seeing what they're actually like, if I can find any. This was fun to make though, and I do plan on making, of course, other similar stuff like this in the future, so hopefully you'll stick around till then. Thank you so much for watching again. Have a good one, and hope to see you next time. Let's see where this can take us.